everyone. This is the Buttercup podcast where we talk about early childhood topics. Today, I'm so excited because I get to talk with Anne Hillerman, and I'm going to tell you who she is in just a minute. And she is part of a new series that I'm doing. She's the fourth person that I'm going to be talking to about mentorships, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thank you, Anne.
Oh, me too. Thank you so much for asking me. It's a lovely topic.
Yeah, thank you. Anne Hillerman is the author of best-selling mystery novels and executive producer of the Dark Winds television series on AMC. Her 10th mystery, tentatively titled Solstice of the Shadows, will be released in 2025. All of her novels have been New York Times bestsellers. Anne moved to the Southwest with her parents as a toddler and has happily lived in Santa Fe and Tucson ever since. She's the eldest of author Tony Hillerman's 6 children, and she began her career as a journalist. Her nonfiction book, Tony Hillerman's Landscape, On the Road with Chee and Leaphorn, led to the exciting world of mystery fiction. After her father's death, Anne decided to continue the Jim Chee, Joe Leaphorn mystery series with her debut novel, Spider-Woman's Daughter. The book elevated a minor character, Officer Bernadette Manuelito, to the role of major crime solver. It received the Spur Award from Western Writers of America as the best first mystery. Congratulations, Anne. Anne has been honored with many other awards, too. One of them was the New Mexico Book of the Year, the Frank Waters Awards, the Mountains and Plains Booksellers Awards, the Rounders Award, the Will Rogers Medallion, the Wrangler Award for Dark Winds, and many others. AMC's Dark Winds series grew from stories and characters by Tony and Anne Hillerman. The production stars Zahn McClarnon, Kiowa Gordon, Jessica Matton, and Deanna Allison, among others. The show has been honored with 2 Primetime Emmy Awards, 2 Golden Globes, a Western Heritage Awards for the Best Fictional Television Drama of 2023 and 2024, and several Vision Awards from the National Association for Multi-Ethnicity in Communications. In 2024, it was nominated for an Edgar Award for Best Screenplay from the Mystery Writers of America. Dark Winds is one of the most watched shows on AMC and AMC+. When Anne's not working, she loves to walk with her dogs, read, cook, travel, and enjoy the night sky. Oh, I love that. I love the night sky, too, in the Southwest. It's a whole different experience from the Southwest.
Yes, well, and where you are, too, in the Northwest. It's pretty cool.
Yes. Oh, I know. And it shows up in some of your stories, too. I love how did you get started as a writer, Anne?
Well, let me see. I guess in school, kids have to write essays. And I always really loved that. And when I was, I guess in the first grade, my mom and dad gave me a little diary that had a key. And my mom was really an avid reader. People think a lot of my dad because he had a big career first as a college professor and then as a mystery writer. But my mom was such an avid reader, and books and writing were really, really important to her. So anyway, my mom and dad gave me that little diary, and they said, now every day you should write down, something good that happened to you. So I guess that's how I started writing, and I just loved it. And, a lot of people are kind of nervous about writing, but I guess because I grew up in a family where stories were always really valued, that writing it always came naturally to me. So, in fact, my problem, if I was supposed to write like 100-word essay, in the second grade, or I don't know, however many words you write in the second grade, I would write twice as much. And that's it. No, you got to cut it down. And so now as an adult writing, I still have that very same problem. But in a way, it's good because I think it helps get all my ideas out, and then I can kind of compress them and pick out the best ones and put the other ones somewhere else for use next time.
Yes.
Did that answer your question, or am I just babbling?
No, I love that. And I love how you described the little locket on the diary, because I had similar kind of diary when I was growing up with a locket, and I had two brothers. And that little lock and key was so important because there were things that I wanted to write in there that I didn't want them to know. And with having 5 brothers and sisters, I'm sure you probably had the same thing.
Right. You had to keep it secret. Maybe that was the start of my career as a mystery writer. I don't know.
I love that. Well, and I love that you brought up your dad, and because it's my students who watch this. I have college students who will be watching this podcast or listening to it in the audio version, and they might not know who your dad is. And I used to live in New Mexico, and the Hillerman family is like a literary dynasty because your dad, Tony Hillerman, was a professor at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque and started off like you as a journalist. And
That's right. That's right. And I was a junior in college when he published his first book. And he was actually able to do that because of making the switch from working the schedule that all of us work as journalists, which is basically all the time, from that schedule to moving to first working in public relations for the University of New Mexico. And then when he got his master's, then he was able to teach. And it was sort of the freedom of teaching that gave him time then to work on his book. The other thing, my dad loved teaching, and I know this program is about mentorship, and I think one thing he liked about it, I mean, besides just doing the lesson plans and helping his students become better journalists, was the fact that the way the university was set up then, he had a lot of opportunities for being a mentor. And then I had a career in journalism, and often I would run into, other reporters, and they'd say, "Oh yeah, I had your dad as a teacher, and he was a good teacher." But what I really liked was I would run into him, say at the Frontier restaurant where kids from UNM would hang out, and he would say, "Oh, there you are, Joe, cup of coffee with me." And he would just take the extra time to really check in with them and see, are your classes going okay? Is your life going okay? Do you think you really, are going to want to have a career in journalism? Just kind of befriending them, but also sort of helping them if they were running into some speed bumps along the way. So I think ultimately, his writing, my dad started the Jim Chee, Joe Leaphorn mystery series back in the 1970s. And eventually, his publisher wanted him to write a book a year, and they were sending him on book tours. And then he was getting a lot of invitations to do forwards for books and to do what they call blurbs, little endorsement for books. And I think finally it was just too much to have that career and his career as a college professor. But he always missed teaching and missed that kind of mentorship that he was able to extend to students. Yeah. So anyway, I guess he was kind of, even though he was my dad, I guess he also was a mentor to me in that our relationship, besides being father and daughter, was also really based on our really love for stories and storytelling and for wanting to get things right and wanting to have whatever we were writing absolutely the best it could be.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I love the way you talk about your dad, and you are also a good teacher, Anne, because, to kind of back up a little bit, when the way I got to meet you was through a mutual friend of ours, Cheryl. And when I got to New Mexico, I wanted to have other people to read with, and she was my first person that I got to start reading with. And so Cheryl said, I think we should read a book by Anne Hillerman. And it had come out like not too far before. And so I didn't even know about Tony Hillerman. I learned about Anne Hillerman before I learned about your dad. And this was our first book. It was The Spider Woman's Daughter. And we started, it was just Cheryl and I, and she knows you, and you guys are friends, and you guys were in, Las Cruz, or you were in the New Mexico Press Women together. And then we've got, a neighbor, Kara, to join our book club, and then Jane to join so there were, like a few of us all that would meet once a month on a Saturday at my house, and we would eat snacks and talk about books. And yours was the first one. And then I got to meet you in person at her house. And then I went to some of the talks that you gave. And then getting back to the point of you being a teacher, years later, you were putting on a workshop for our foundation, and then you gave a beautiful keynote that night to people in our community. And what I just remember is your workshop. I learned so much, and I was constantly like taking notes. And one of the notes that I wrote, and I would love for you to tell me what you think about this now, is you said research is seductive. And I took lots and lots of notes, but I remember thinking, oh my gosh, being seduced by research. And so you talked in the workshop about all of the research that you do in the stories that you write, and how your background as an investigative reporter played into the research. Could you talk just a little bit about your research and your writing process?
Sure, I'd be glad to. So I just happened to have here my book that just came out. And this book, it's called Lost Birds. And I had to do a lot of research for that book, because one of the themes in this book is adoption. And when I came up with the idea for this book, there was a law called the Indian Child Welfare Act. And the purpose of that law was to keep Navajo kids, Apache kids, Pueblo kids, any child who is born into a tribal community, this child is up for adoption, to keep that child within the tribal community, to not have that child, be adopted by a family with Scandinavian roots or whatever, to really try to keep the tribal the tribal culture together by keeping these children within the tribe. So, I think that theme particularly appealed to me because all of my brothers and sisters were adopted. And a lot of my cousins were adopted. My mom had a sister who was adopted. So adoption has been really a big deal in my own family. So anyway, as I'm writing this, as I'm thinking about this book, I think, what about a person who was adopted before this act came to be? So say this person had a Navajo mom or a Navajo dad or two Navajo parents, and they couldn't raise that baby. So then that baby was adopted out of the tribe, and time goes on. And then this person is thinking, gee, who am I really? And what were my biological roots? So I did a lot of research about the act, about adopted people, and what is it that inspires them to search for their birth parents, and how many of these reunions are happy reunions, and how many of them are unhappy reunions, and is the birth mom glad to finally see this baby that she gave up for adoption or not? And so I did a lot of research, and I came up that the title Lost Birds came from the Battle of Little Bighorn. And there was, the battle was really terrible, and it really decimated the Indian people involved in that battle. And on the battleground, there was an Indian woman who had a newborn, and she had been killed, but she had fallen to protect her baby. So when the soldiers came by looking at the devastation, they found the baby, and then that baby was adopted by one of the military leaders who really was not particularly interested in being a dad, but luckily his wife then nurtured that child, and they found out what the Indian name would have been for lost bird, and that was what they called her. So that was where the name for my book came. And that Lost Birds monitor is used among a lot of tribal people for these children who've been adopted outside the tribe and then come back to the nest and are reunited with their biological parents. And I know I'm talking too long about this, but when you ask about this is why research is so seductive. So as I'm looking into this, I find out there's a woman, her roots were Navajo. She was adopted out of the tribe. She went to New York. She became a fashion designer. So then she discovers that she's Navajo and now she's designing, like now she's into skateboarding and she's designing all this fashion for Navajo skateboarders. I mean, it's just research is really good. And I think, it's in college and I was doing term papers and you're writing 1,000 words, 2,000, whatever. You have the envelope you're writing in. I had the same problem. I would be doing the research and more research. And meanwhile, I'm thinking, oh, I've got to turn this paper in on Monday. And now it's already Friday. I guess I better stop doing research and start doing the writing. But I think anybody who has a curious brain, there's just something really lovely about research. And you never know what you don't know until you start doing the research. And otherwise, you can, if you don't know exactly what you don't know, even though you never know everything you don't know. Anyway, it really helps in terms of structuring the story. So I never thought of that when I figured I would be writing fiction. I thought I had left that behind in my journalism days, but no, I'm still doing research.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And it's such a treat and pleasure to read your writing because you learn so many things, and it's such a treat to all of the landscapes you take us to in your writing. And one of the things you talked about with our workshop was your writing process. And one of the sweet stories you told was about your dad's writing desk. And what's your process like for writing? Is it similar, like with a special location or rituals that you do, or?
Oh, yeah, I have, for a long time, I lived in New Mexico and a couple years ago, 14 months ago, I married a very lovely guy who lived in Tucson. So now I have a house in Tucson and a house in Santa Fe. And in both of those houses, I'm lucky enough to have an office where I can close the door. So when I'm working on the first draft, I write best in the mornings. So I get up and maybe go for a walk, have some coffee, have some breakfast. And then I sit down and I try to not check the email, not look at text messages, not do all of those things that laundry, all those things that suddenly you have to do when you're starting a new project. I try to just for all morning, just stay focused on whatever it is that I'm going to be writing. And usually when I start, I have an idea. I've been in my mysteries. I have 3 characters who I deal with. The Bernadette Manuelito, who was the one that I basically reinvigorated the series with, and her husband, Jim Chee, and then Joe Leaphorn, who is basically their mentor. He's an older guy who has helped both of them refine their skills, both in the technical stuff that police officers need to learn, but also in how to deal with people, how to deal with difficult people, how to deal with bosses, all that stuff. So anyway, I've got those 3 characters. Each of them needs to have something to do in my stories. So I think, okay, of you 3, which one is going to be the lead? And usually it's Bernie, but sometimes Jim Chee gets in there too. And in Lost Birds, I'm patting it over here on the side, that Joe Leaphorn had a main role. So I think of that. And then I think I always said a big part of my story is on the Navajo Nation. So I think, okay, where do I want this story to unfold? And with Lost Birds, there are some, here, I'll show you. I don't know if you can see this. These 2 things are actual sandstone buttes that they're on the Navajo Nation. And so, I always loved driving by them. And whenever I drive by them, I would see people taking their picture with those buttes in the background. So I thought, well, it'd be fun to have those in a book. So then I'm thinking, okay, what kind of a story would have to do with these buttes? Well, the buttes are on a part of the Navajo Nation called Tonalea. And the Tonalea area is known for a type of weaving that has a figure called the water bug on those rugs. And anyway, they're really beautiful rugs. And there's a famous trading post called the Red Lake Trading Post that specialized in those rugs. So, I'm having all of these ideas, and then I just kind of start writing. And after a while, as I'm writing, more ideas come to me, and some of them are good ideas and some of them are not so good ideas. But I try to just stay focused on that writing for 2-3 hours. I might get up and have another cup of coffee, or maybe my dog is saying she needs to go out and stretch, whatever. But anyway, I try to not get distracted by paying bills or talking to my sister or doing all the things that are more fun to do. And then in the afternoon, if things have gone well, I might do some more writing. If it's been a struggle, then maybe I would go back to research and do a little research about those rugs from the Tonalea area, or a little more research about how people who've been adopted, what process they go through to find their birth parents. So anyway, and I keep doing that until I finally get the book written more or less from beginning to end. And then while I'm going through it, if I know there's something, the word isn't right, the pacing isn't right, it's not right, but I just want to keep the momentum going of telling the story. I'll mark those with a yellow highlighter, and then I go back and look at those places and see if they need to be fixed up, if I need to just take them out altogether. Sometimes they give me a whole other idea. Anyway, then about the second or third draft, if it seems like at this point the story is in good enough shape that somebody besides me could read it, then I have what I call beta readers. And then I send the draft off to them. And while they're reading it, I'm still thinking about it and still changing it, which isn't really fair to them. But anyway, or sometimes I don't do that. Sometimes I just work in the garden or do something that's totally non-writing. Anyway, then I get back their comments, and then I see what it was that they liked and what they didn't like, and do I agree with it or not, and make some changes. And then I send it off to my editor in New York. And then she usually has it for a couple weeks, and then she sends it back to me with questions and comments, and then I take care of her questions. And at that point, I usually have more changes I want to make myself. And then hopefully she sends it back one more time with just a few little questions, or, oh, I thought you were going to take care of this and you didn't. Oh yeah, I forgot to. Anyway, then she sends it off to a copy editor, and then I get a break until the copy editor sends it back. And then the copy editor says stuff like, well, here on page 85, they're eating breakfast, and here on page 101, they're eating breakfast again. Shouldn't this be lunch? Stuff like that, little details that slipped away. And that's kind of it.
Wow, that is amazing. And is about one book a year what you try to do?
Yeah. Usually it takes me maybe 7 months to get like a solid draft of it, and then the rest of the time is dealing with beta readers and making corrections and dealing with the editor.
That is awesome. Thank you so much, Anne. It's so wonderful to hear what your process is like, and I think my students who are watching this might be writing for classes or other things, and it's just so great to hear how different people approach writing and the process of writing. Well, and your beta readers.
I have to interrupt you for one second. A lot of really good writers write from outlines. And I think whatever your process is, each person has their own process, and we all just need to kind of value that and go with that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And you're on your 10th book, so you definitely know what works for you.
Yeah. I did an interview with a writer named John Sanford, who's written, I don't know, a gajillion books, and he writes from outlines, and his books are great too. So I don't know. I really I like the idea of discovering what's going to happen next by writing a book rather than doing an outline where you already know everything that's going to happen. But some people say they couldn't write without an outline. So, it's just everybody, you just need to see what works for you and do that.
Yes. And it sounds like you've had a lot of mentors in your career. Was there a mentor that sticks out as doing something that really helped you shape your writing practice?
When I first was starting in journalism, I had started as an intern, and it was just a job for 90 days with what they called a news service. So I was doing a lot of writing, but there was nobody who was editing me. But luckily, this was in Santa Fe, and the daily paper in Santa Fe had just hired a seasoned editor. He must have been, in his mid-60s. And he'd worked in New York, and then he just got tired of New York, and he was just about ready to retire. But he loved journalism. So he hired me first just as a copy editor, and then later as a reporter to work at the New Mexican. And he was a wonderful mentor. He was very supportive, but not just shining me on, not just saying, "Oh, you're wonderful. Everything you write is wonderful." I mean, he was very good at saying, in this story, this story had a lot of good stuff in it, but you should have started it here. You really missed the point. Or, I like the reporting you did here, but you should, it would have been even better if you'd asked this question and this question and this question. He was really good at balancing praise with suggestions on how things could be better. And the suggestions rarely turned into criticism. They were more like, I support you and I understand you're doing the best you can, and this is how you could do it even better. And at a time in my career when I was feeling pretty vulnerable and pretty shaky, it was enormously helpful to have somebody like that just, giving me an affirmation that I could do it.
Yes. Oh, I love that you had him to give you feedback and who supported you in your growth and kind of met you where you were at and gave you what you needed. And there's a story, another writer who has so many similarities to you is Nora Ephron. She started off as a journalist. She had parents who were both in the writing business. Well, both her parents were screenwriters in Hollywood. And after she was a journalist, she went on to write fiction, and she wrote the screenplay to one of my favorite movies, Sleepless in Seattle. But one of she has this story. I don't know. I might be botching how the story went, but I think I read it someplace or saw an interview where she said she came home from school one day and something bad happened. Like she fell on her way coming home and skinned her knee. And so she went home and was telling her mom this story that, she hurt herself and she was hoping to get some sympathy. And her mom said, "Nora, take notes. Everything is copy." And I love that story because she didn't get the feedback she wanted, but she was able to take that feedback from her mom, her mentor writer at the time, and to be able to use it. And everything is copy and take notes. And you can even take something that is lemons and try to make it into a story. And I just thought, that you and her have so much in common with your backgrounds and family and also mentorships. So have you had a chance to mentor writers yourself as a mentor?
I work with a program called Celebrate Youth, which It was a summer program, and it was for people who were interested in doing something in the arts. And I'd say probably half of them were writers. And it was so much fun. We did a program in the summer that had to do with journalism. And then that worked out really well. So then during the school year, they would be working on, one young man I worked with he wanted to write a giant science fiction novel. And so every week he would come in. That was when I was still working at the Albuquerque Journal. He would come into the office and we'd go into the coffee room and he'd show me what he was writing. And I have to say, I didn't say this to him, but I really am not a big science fiction writer. But I knew enough about good writing to say to him, this is where this stuff is really good. It would be good to do more of this. And this part is just too long and you've already said it. And even though, I'm not saying, delete it forever, but just take it out and put it in a special file and, don't kill it because I know it's your special baby, but it just doesn't work in this story. And he really listened. And he really wanted to do well. And he and I got along just fine. And then a few years later, he called me and he said, "You'll never guess what my job is." I said, and I was thinking, maybe he's gone to work for, some science fiction movie. I said, "What's your job?" He said, "I'm the public information director for the Santa Fe Animal Shelter." I said, "Oh, great." So I don't know. The main thing that mentors in the relationship, it seems to me, is just as a mentor, just helping the person you're dealing with realize how much potential they have. And to just kind of give themselves permission to experiment a little and maybe to make some mistakes, but just to go forth at full speed. And so I think that while this guy never became a science fiction writer, certainly he was a good enough writer to get this job, which he loved. So it made me feel good to see him happy doing something that he really had wanted to do, even though I didn't know he was crazy about animals.
Yeah. Oh, that is great. If you had to pick a highlight of your career so far, or one of the greatest moments, do you have one or two that stands out as a highlight for you?
Yeah, I got an award called the Rounders Award. It was a strange and lovely thing. It's given by the New Mexico Department of Agriculture. And they do it down in your old stomping grounds in Las Cruces at the Farm and Ranch Museum. And the idea of it is to shine a little light on people whose work helps keep the basic spirit of the American West alive. And they've been doing it for, 15 or 20 years. I've heard of it, but just kind of in the back of my brain. And they had only given it to 3 or 4 women. All the rest of them were guys. A lot of them were big ranchers who maybe had developed a special strain of cattle or cowboy poets. One of the women they gave it to was a saddle maker. And there had been a few writers. Max Evans, I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he wrote wonderful stories about the West. Anyway, the Rounders was the name of one of his books, so the award was named after him. Anyway, it really made me happy to get that award because it was like my stories are bigger than just a little paperback that somebody picks up at an airport. That they really mean something to more people. So that was a real big honor.
Oh, that is beautiful. And that location too, the Farm and Ranch Museum in Las Cruces, New Mexico, is stunning. I can just picture you going up there and receiving your award, Anne, at the Farm and Ranch Museum. And my daughter was a preschooler during some of that time, and we used to love to go there anytime, pretty much. But they had horses that we like to ride, and also they have so many neat things there for children and beautiful paintings and I can just picture you there.
Yeah,
Well,
it was really wonderful. It was so interesting because my neighbor in Santa Fe, who had been a longtime friend, not only of my husband's, but my husband's parents, and he's like in his 80s now, he was one of the honorees too. And it's like, wow, what a small world this is.
oh, beautiful. I love the museums in New Mexico. They are so amazing and gorgeous, and yeah. Well, what's the biggest lesson you've learned from either being a mentor or a mentee?
That's an interesting question. As a mentor, one lesson I've learned is that relationships, it takes some patience. You know, people, I think all of this work tends to make people feel pretty vulnerable. And so if you're mentoring somebody who wants to be a writer or an artist or a musician or anything, where you're putting some of your inner feelings, out there, and you're at risk of, getting squashed by bad criticism, it takes a while to develop that kind of trust, and particularly enough trust that somebody can kind of tell you what you've done that isn't as good as you thought it was, which is sort of the role of a mentor in a way. So I think one thing that I learned from being a mentor was to be patient with with relationships, and to be a better listener, to give people space to talk about things, and not to kind of jump in with my own stories or with questions, to just kind of say, oh, tell me more about that, not to just encourage them to tell their own stories. As a mentee, I think one thing I learned was to be a little braver about asking for help. And that always has been difficult for me, and I think it's hard for a lot of people. But when I was brave enough to ask, the advice that I got back really was valuable. So I'd say those were probably the two most important things I learned.
I love that. Yes, it takes a lot of courage to ask for help, and sometimes we don't know we need the help, and then when we discover we do need the help, it's kind of you put yourself out there asking someone to help you, and that's great advice. Not be afraid to ask other people advice, and
you find that people are kind of honored when you come to them and say, I know you know more about this than I do, and I'd really appreciate your help or your advice or whatever. Most people say, sure, thank you for asking.
Yeah.
And if they don't, you don't want to be your mentor anyway.
Well, this one time, my husband, he was writing a piece. He had to write a manuscript for a competition to get onto law review. He was in law school at the time, and I was a teacher. I was teaching special education up in Washington State, and he was down in Oregon going to school. And he said, could you read my writing before I, submit it to this competition? It's really important to me. And so I was thinking, we weren't even married at the time, and I was thinking, well, I don't want to hurt his feelings. And so on the manuscript, I wrote things like, good job. Oh, I know what you mean there. And just silly stuff that wasn't like constructive or helpful. And so he said, I was looking for a little more depth there. And I just thought, as someone giving feedback, I liked what you said about being a mentor too, because different people need different things at different times. And
right.
The good news is he ended up getting on Law Review, and the second year he was the managing editor of Law Review, so it worked out fine in his favor, but it was a good thing he was, and just depending on my feedback, because I've learned a lot since then about being in a mentorship, because it is all about relationships. And I like what you said about patience and letting the mentorship evolve, because no two are the same. It's just like a relationship. Mentors and mentees have unique ways of working together. Yeah. Well,
that's right. That's right.
Is there anything you want to wrap up with, Anne? Any comments or thing that we haven't talked about yet that you want to share?
You covered it very well. Oh, you mentioned dark winds in your introduction, and I just have to make a disclaimer. Really, my big connection with dark winds was just signing the contract, which gave them the right to use my. How can I say this? My re-envisioning of Bernadette Manuelito, a character my dad created, in her new role as a stand-up crime solver and not just sweet little girlfriend. But other than that, the script writers and the directors and the actors have taken those stories and really given them new life and made some real interesting changes. So if people have read Tony Hillerman's books or my books, and then they see the series, sometimes they say, wait a minute, that didn't happen and that didn't happen. And it's true, it didn't happen in the books, but it makes really good TV. So that series is on AMC, now it's on Netflix. And the new series will be out, the third season will be out in 2025.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait.
As with my new book, both of them coming in the spring. So,
that is awesome. Well, we just moved here to Wyoming, and one of the things that I love to do is walk through libraries, and we have a beautiful library at my university and also a public library. And I love to go look for you in the libraries. And so we started off in fiction, and it was like, oh, Anne's not here in fiction. And so you're categorized in mystery, in the mystery section here in our library.
But good. And you have C.J. Box and Craig Johnson up in Wyoming. Yeah. And Margaret Cole's books, some of hers are set on the Wind River Reservation, which stretches into Wyoming. So lots of good writers in Wyoming. That landscape just inspires people.
Yes. Yeah. Such beautiful landscape. Well, how can listeners follow you, Anne?
There's two ways. I'm on Facebook. So if you just say, search Anne Hillerman author, you'll see me. I have a wonderful helper who works with me on Facebook. So sometimes I just get distracted, but she's really good about putting up new stuff about dark winds or the Navajo Nation or things that are happening with me on Facebook. And also I have a website, which is annehillerman.com. And I try to put, if I'm doing talks, I'm doing some talks in Colorado and some talks in Santa Fe and a talk here in Tucson. So I put those on my events page up there on my website.
That's awesome.
And and there's also an email there if people want to email me and ask me any questions or just say, hey, hi.
Well, thank you so much, Anne. It's so wonderful to talk with you and connect with you again. And I'm so excited for all the neat things that you have coming up. And I can't wait to see the new Dark Winds on Netflix and also read your next book and to continue reading all of the other ones that you have. So you have 10.
I got 2 more. I'm sure this one, The Way of the Bear is just coming out now in paperback. So
beautiful.
Yay! Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Marissa, and good luck to all your students. I hope they have just wonderful writing and a wonderful time writing.
Thank you, Anne, for inspiring us, and thank you for your writing, and thank you for the mentorships and advice for being a mentor and a mentee.
My pleasure. My pleasure. You have a good day.